Welcome back to another video. My name is Heidi, this is Books and Cables, and today I'm going to be showing you the last steps of this Marjorie sweater or jumper. Probably in a not unexpected turn of events, I have once again started a project and then put it aside for several months, even though there's only one sleeve and the neckline left to go. So I thought this would be a good chance to film those last steps because I'm going to be setting in a puff sleeve. I think this may have been an error in the pattern. This was actually a knitting pattern that I struggled quite a bit with because there was a few issues which I actually reached out and contacted the designer about, and I believe she's fixed most of them. There was some wonkiness with the charts, so I think everyone who buy it from now on should not have those same issues. But one of the things that I encountered was that there was too many stitches left over in the cap, and maybe also I don't read instructions very well, so it could be a me thing as well. But because this is a vintage style sweater anyway, the puff sleeves actually add something and it makes it look a little bit more romantic, so I'm not unhappy with the results. So basically what I have to do today, I already knit what is kind of the most painful part for me, which is this like 3 inches of ribbing. I just have to do the rest of the color work sleeve and the shaping, and there's going to be a steek in them to open up the hole for the arm. And what I'm going to do is seam in, so set in the sleeve, and then show you how to do the puff sleeve. So I think those are interesting techniques to display, and it gives me a shorter project to show you on, so less video editing for me too. So I hope you enjoy, and I'm gonna flip over now to voiceover Heidi. Here's the spread of colors I'll be using for this pattern. The first step I'm showing you here is joining the yarn using a method called split splicing. So I actually knit this sleeve before and then discovered some issues with the decrease rate shown on the chart. So I cut off everything except for the rib cuff, and I'm reknitting the color work. One of the characteristics of particularly non-superwash treated wool is that there are these little barbs coming out of the individual fiber, which with heat, moisture, and friction will catch on one another and adhere. This is called felting. Usually it's not desired, but you can take advantage of that and seamlessly join 2 pieces of yarn together. I split the strands in the middle, overlap it, lick my hand, and rub to add friction. Obviously you can get a bowl of water if you don't want to lick your hand. My preferred method for knitting stranded color work is two-handed. I keep the color I want to pop out, or the dominant color, on the left side. This is usually the pattern color that's forming the motif, and I knit it by picking the yarn, or continental style. The background color is kept on my right side. This is knit by throwing the yarn, or English style. Keeping your dominant color on the left side is important because of the way the strands lay across the back. It does look more prominent. I left a link down below to a blog post that explains more on color dominance, as well as two-handed versus one-handed methods for knitting stranded color work. Now the two-handed method does take a little bit more learning and practice. I had knit with a yarn in my left hand by picking or continental style my whole life, so knitting had become muscle memory at this point. Beginning to use my other side did not come easily at all. My tension was super uneven and my movement felt so awkward when I first started. So don't feel like you need to be a color work expert on your first project. I'm still picking up and cringing at my early projects, but I can see how much better I got over time. If you're currently struggling with learning to knit on your other side, something I found super helpful was doing a small plain stockinette project where I forced myself to knit with the other hand, and that got me used to the feeling of the movement and how to tension my yarn properly without throwing the extra wrench of another color into the mix. If you're like me and you hate weaving in ends at the end of a project, here's a trick I use to weave things in as I go. While I'm knitting, I make sure to wrap my working yarn and catch things against the fabric that I'm working on. Just make sure that the strand is woven in the direction that the working yarn was sitting at, or you'll warp the stitches on the facing side. For example, at the end of a color, I cut the yarn and weave the end by knitting it into the first few stitches of the next round. When I'm joining a new color, I work with that new color for the first round until the last few stitches left, and then I weave it in by knitting that end into the last few stitches of the round. Since this is a short sleeve, I didn't have to knit for that long before starting to shape the sleeve cap. I'm starting here by binding off the underarm stitches. You'll see that I wove in the contrast color as I went into the bind off, so I didn't have a long length of the contrast color stretching across the back of the bound off stitches. Normally at this point in the sleeve cap, you would start knitting flat or back and forth, alternating between knit rows and purl rows. However, knitting color work is much easier in the round when you only have to do knit stitches and you can see the motifs taking shape. What we can do is employ a method called steeking that will allow us to continue with the shaping in the round. Right now I'm alternating the main and contrast color in a backwards loop cast on in order to create those steek or waist stitches. And that's the sleeve done. So you always cast off the steek stitches the row before you cast off everything else, because then that creates the clear end point for the steek to match the beginning where you cast it on, and so you know where to start and stop cutting. Good morning, friends. Yesterday night I finished off the sleeve. Here it is. So you can see the steek in the middle there, and then there's the shaping along the sides. So I did increases all the way up and then some more rapid increases up here to make that sort of curved bell shape. And then here are the underarm stitches there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut it open, and then I've got my darning needles here, and I'm going to sew it into the armhole. The top of the sleeve cap here by doing a running stitch, picking up 2 stitches while passing over 2 all the way across the top.
Once all the stitches have been gathered, I pull it tight and secure it in that puff shape until we are ready to seam it into the shoulder. Now to seam all the way up the sides until we get to the top of the shoulder, ensuring that all the motifs stay aligned. I sewed down the gathers by doing a mattress stitch where I picked up a bar of one row on the shoulder, and then I would pick up the top of each little gather mound and sewed that down. So because there is no collar on this particular pattern, what it calls for me to do right now is to pick up the stitches from the neck edge and all of the stitches we had put on hold for the front and the back of the neck, and knit in plain stocking net for some selvage rows that will be sewn down under so that there's no raw edges visible on the front side. So final thoughts on the sweater. I'm going to start with the positives first because I do have a few things that I didn't love about this pattern. So the positives are the colorways chosen by the designer, because I went with the second color palette that was suggested. So I really like the combination of the yellows and the blues, and then the pop of pink in the middle. I think that's really lovely. It's a really, I think the design aesthetic is really nice about it. Like, I really like this like vintage style, like vintage Shetland, Fair Isle style garment. but there are a lot of things that I didn't enjoy about using the pattern itself. So I did already reach out to the designer for corrections because basically there were errors on every single one of those charts, and she has since corrected it. However, there were other things about the pattern in general that I wasn't super happy with. There was only one other project that had ever been made, which indicated to me that the pattern itself hadn't been test knitted. And the one that had been tested was for a much smaller size, so even though I think the size range did go up to, I don't remember, I'll put up on the screen what the size range went up to. I don't really necessarily trust designers who design for smaller bodies to know how to fit plus size bodies very well. So it would have been really nice to see an example of this pattern on another person who was larger, and some of those issues that I encountered. For example, the armhole is way too small. So it would have been nice to see if the pattern had been tested by more people, and some of those things may have been brought up by other people who were larger, that, you know, like, you might not be proportional, which is the way that a lot of grading is done, is proportionally and done through charts. So, you know, if enough people who have larger arms would have raised it, and maybe would have been something that I had known to adjust for myself. Obviously the sleeve cap, I ended up with way too many stitches at the end. I actually re-knit these sleeves 4 times in total, with different rates of decreasing, and none of them seems to match either the chart or the final number at the end. So some of those things I think would have been found had it been tested by a group of people, at least one for each size. But perhaps it was, but the indication was that it wasn't. The other thing is more of a, I don't know if I can fault the designer for this, but it's more of just a general comment on the design. This was really frustrating to set in as a sleeve because you had to align the patterns to the body, and I kind of failed in some places, so it doesn't quite align, so that really kind of bugs me. Overall, I think this is cute and I would wear it, but it's not my favorite project that I've ever made. But, you know, it is what you can't like everything, and I think this was a interesting project in terms of learning, because I did figure out how to set in sleeves in a different way, which is the puff sleeves on top, so that was really interesting. In terms of the bust shaping, because it is done proportionally on the front and the back, I didn't get as much ease as I need in my bust, so the fit in a lot of garments, because they're based on people who have smaller bust sizes, for example, the proportionality isn't so much an issue, because, you know, it can just, whatever extra fabric you need, it would stretch it from the back. But if you do have a big difference in your waist and your bust, like I have probably a 5-inch difference between my waist and my bust, so I actually probably would have needed some increases in order to get it to fit properly, rather than it being stretched, essentially taut across my chest here. Yep. So, I mean, I kind of, I don't know, like I always want to be positive in terms of pattern reviews, especially if it's like fine, but there was just like a lot of things here, and I feel kind of bad because I didn't necessarily, well, I don't know, because I had reached out to the designer, and then I found other stuff that I had comments on, and I just felt like at one point I've paid for a product and I shouldn't be doing the work of providing feedback when they should have been responsible for ensuring that their product was the best that it can be by the time it went to publish. So I feel bad that I'm kind of being negative here, but like, I did pay money for a pattern that I ended up having to rewrite a lot of myself, and I still have a lot of fit issues that if I had sort of anticipated that I would have issues, I may have taken a closer look at the instructions to maybe figure out those fit issues before I steeked it, for example, so now it's too late. So I mean, it's really tight here under the arms, so I mean, if I really wanted to fix it, what I can do is add a gusset. So I'll just add a little triangle of fabric to give it more movement, and I think that would solve the problem, because it's not like cutting off circulation or anything, it's just very tight against my arm, and I don't know if I could go through the whole day with it so tight there, but yeah. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and some of those techniques that I had demonstrated throughout were helpful to you. Let me know below what kind of projects you're working on right now, and I hope we'll see you again around here. Okay, thanks for watching.